$93 billion and 13 years. That's what NASA spent building a plan to return astronauts to the moon. Giant rocket, crew capsule, a space station orbiting the moon, 2 companies building landers. But in February 2026, a new NASA administrator walked in and scrapped half of it overnight. The next 3 Artemis missions look nothing like what NASA was promising 12 months ago. And the story behind it is one of the wildest things happening in science right now. So let's start with the man who blew up the old plan. Jared Isaacman became NASA's administrator in early 2026. If that name sounds familiar, he is the billionaire fintech entrepreneur who commanded the SpaceX Polaris Dawn mission and performed the first ever commercial spacewalk. This is not a career bureaucrat shuffling papers around an office. This is a guy who has literally floated in the vacuum of space and decided he wanted to run the space agency. And his first major act was one of the most dramatic restructurings NASA has ever seen. On February 27, 2026, Isaacman laid out the problem during a press conference at NASA headquarters in Washington. The current approach of launching the SLS rocket once every 3 years while simultaneously trying to introduce major vehicle upgrades was, in his words, not a path to success. He was looking at the same data everyone else was trying to ignore. SpaceX's Starship, the vehicle NASA was counting on to actually land astronauts on the moon, had experienced 5 failures across 11 test flights. The company had never once transferred propellant between 2 separate vehicles in orbit, which is something that absolutely has to work before anyone rides Starship to the lunar surface. And a leaked internal SpaceX planning document from November 2025 showed the earliest realistic crewed moon landing would not happen until September 2028. NASA's own Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel had been waving red flags for months, with their September 2025 assessment warning that the Starship human landing system schedule was significantly challenged and could slip by years. So Isaacman did something NASA almost never does. He admitted the current plan was not working and he changed course, fast. 3 weeks later, on March 24th, at an event NASA called Ignition Day, Isaacman dropped an even bigger bombshell. The Lunar Gateway, a planned space station designed to orbit the moon and serve as a waypoint for future lunar missions, was being paused in its current form. That station had $5.3 billion in commitments. Hardware was being built by the European Space Agency in Italy, JAXA in Japan, the Canadian Space Agency, and the UAE. ESA had spent years constructing a habitation module called iHab through Thales Alenia Space at their facility in Turin. And now they were being told, basically, we'll let you know what's happening with your hardware by June. On top of that, NASA killed the SLS Block 1B, Boeing's upgraded version of the giant rocket that would have used a new exploration upper stage for more lifting capacity. And they issued a stop work order on Mobile Launcher 2, the $2.5 billion launch platform that Bechtel was constructing specifically for that upgraded rocket at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. International partners were blindsided, billions in hardware development and years of engineering work thrown into uncertainty in a matter of weeks. So what's actually replacing all of this? Let's break down each mission. Artemis 3 was supposed to be the one, the triumphant return to the lunar surface, the first woman on the moon, the first person of color to walk on another world. It was going to be the headline moment, the image in every textbook for the next 100 years. Instead, Artemis 3 is now a roughly 30-day test flight in Earth orbit, targeting somewhere around mid-2027. No lunar landing, no moonwalks, no South Pole. The mission will test whether the Orion spacecraft can successfully rendezvous and dock with one or both of the commercial lunar landers in orbit. Think of it as the Artemis program's version of Apollo 9, the mission where NASA tested the lunar module in Earth orbit before anyone dared fly it to the actual moon on Apollo 11. Smart approach, honestly. Apollo didn't jump straight to a landing either. They built up to it step by step. As of early April 2026, Isaacman revealed that NASA held its first senior-level Artemis 3 mission design discussion on April 7th. Key questions are still wide open. Will it dock with SpaceX's Starship, Blue Origin's Blue Moon, or both? Will the orbit be low Earth orbit or something higher? Will the crew test the new XMU spacesuit with a spacewalk? Nobody knows yet. And no crew has been officially announced, though NASA promised an announcement soon after the successful Artemis to splash down in April 2026. The delay history on this single mission is staggering. Artemis 3 originally targeted 2024, then it slipped to 2025, then 2026, then September 2026, then 2027, then January 2028. And now it's been completely redesigned as a different kind of mission entirely. That's at least 7 schedule changes across 9 years. But here's where it gets really exciting, because all of that testing clears the path for the big one. Artemis 4 is now targeting early 2028, and if it succeeds, it will be the first crewed landing on the moon since Apollo 17 touched down on December 14, 1972. That's a gap of more than 55 years. Think about that for a second. Humans walked on the moon before the invention of the personal computer, before email, before the internet, before smartphones existed, and we just stopped going. 4 astronauts will launch aboard the SLS rocket and Orion crew capsule from Kennedy Space Center. 2 of them will transfer to whichever commercial lander is ready and descend to the moon's south pole. The other 2 stay in lunar orbit aboard Orion, conducting science and monitoring the landing from above. Isaacman has been absolutely direct about the lander selection. The first company capable of delivering a working lander is the one America is going to fly. SpaceX and Blue Origin are in a dead sprint, and NASA is genuinely prepared to go with either one. No crew has been named for Artemis 4 yet. The astronauts will likely be drawn from the 18 candidates named to NASA's Artemis team in December 2020, plus graduates from the Artemis Generation astronaut class. What we do know is that this mission will include the first woman and the first person of color to walk on the lunar surface, a commitment NASA has maintained through every iteration of the program. The Orion spacecraft will be powered by European Service Module 4, built by Airbus in Bremen, Germany, and shipped to NASA in December 2025. And here's a piece of history that space nerds are going to love. The 4 RS-25 engines on the SLS core stage for Artemis 4 will be the last heritage space shuttle main engines ever flown. Engines with designations E2044, E2050, E2051, and E2063. Starting with Artemis 5, NASA transitions to newly manufactured RS-25 engines running at 111% thrust. Now let's talk about what happens when astronauts actually set foot on the lunar surface. Because this isn't a repeat of Apollo. They're not planting a flag, bouncing around for a couple hours, and heading home. 2 astronauts will spend approximately 1 week on the moon near the South Pole, conducting up to 4 moonwalks of about 6 hours each. Their first EVA on day 2 handles initial surface operations and setup. Day 3 focuses on geological sampling and instrument deployment. Day 5 involves collecting samples from crater ejecta blankets, the debris fields thrown outward by ancient asteroid impacts. And Day 6 deploys geotechnical instruments and an environmental monitoring station for experiments on using lunar resources. This is fundamentally different from how Apollo worked. Apollo 11's crew spent just 21 hours on the surface. Even Apollo 17, the longest surface stay ever, only managed about 75 hours over 3 days. Artemis 4's crew will have roughly 170 hours on the moon, with dedicated science objectives that Apollo astronauts could only dream about. 3 science instruments have already been selected by NASA. The first is LEMS, a compact seismometer designed to run autonomously for up to 2 years, detecting moonquakes and potentially becoming the first station in a global lunar seismic network. Scientists have wanted a permanent seismic monitor on the moon since the Apollo instruments were shut down in 1977. Nearly 50 years of silence on lunar seismology are about to end. The second instrument is called LEAF, and this one is genuinely fascinating. It will be the first experiment ever to observe plant photosynthesis and growth under actual lunar gravity and radiation conditions. We've grown plants on the International Space Station in microgravity, but the moon's 1/6 gravity is a completely different environment. If humanity is ever going to grow food off Earth, this tiny experiment is literally step 1 of proving it's possible. The third instrument, the Lunar Dielectric Analyzer built by the University of Tokyo with JAXA support, will probe the electrical properties of the lunar soil to help pinpoint where subsurface water ice is hiding. That data feeds directly into the long-term plan for extracting and using lunar water, and the location they're targeting might be the most scientifically significant place humans have ever tried to visit. NASA has narrowed the Artemis landing zone to 9 candidate regions, all within 6 degrees of the lunar South Pole. These include Malapert Massif, a mountain rising over 16,000 feet with near-perpetual sunlight for solar power. There's the Mons Mouton Plateau, the widest and flattest candidate stretching 37 miles across. And there are sites along the rims of De Gerlach, Haworth, Nobile, and Amundsen craters. The final site depends on launch window timing. Here's why the South Pole matters so much. The permanently shadowed regions inside those craters may hold water ice that has been preserved for billions of years, sitting at temperatures among the coldest measured anywhere in our solar system. Some of these areas haven't seen sunlight in over 2 billion years. The ice wasn't deposited by rain or snowfall. It arrived via ancient comet and asteroid impacts, and the permanent shadow has kept it frozen in place ever since. That ice isn't just scientifically fascinating. It could be cracked into hydrogen and oxygen to provide drinking water, breathable air, and rocket fuel for future missions. If you can make fuel on the moon instead of hauling it from Earth, you drastically cut the cost of every mission that follows. And the nearby peaks that receive near constant sunlight mean reliable solar power generation around the clock. No human has ever visited this region. Every single one of the 6 Apollo landings happened near the lunar equator, thousands of miles from the South Pole. If you're finding this deep dive into the future of space exploration as wild as I do, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, and the next chapter of Artemis is going to be intense. Now let's get into the engineering that makes or breaks everything. SpaceX's human landing system is a modified version of their Starship rocket. It stands 165 feet tall, roughly the height of a 15-story building, making it the largest spacecraft ever designed to land on another celestial body. It has a built-in elevator system to lower astronauts from the crew cabin all the way down to the surface, and it runs on Raptor engines burning liquid methane and liquid oxygen. NASA has awarded SpaceX approximately $4.5 billion for this lander. But here's the engineering challenge that keeps mission planners up at night. Before every single crewed landing attempt, SpaceX has to launch 8 to 16 separate tanker flights to fill an orbital propellant depot floating in space. Then they launch the actual Starship lander, which docks with that depot and tops off its fuel tanks for the trip to the moon. That means potentially 17 launches just to support one lunar mission. If even one of those launches fails, or the refueling process hits a snag, the entire landing could be delayed by months while the propellant boils off in space. As of early 2026, SpaceX has never successfully transferred propellant between 2 separate vehicles in orbit. They did demonstrate an internal fuel transfer within a single Starship during test flight IFT-3 in March 2024. But ship-to-ship transfer in the vacuum of space, with cryogenic propellants that want to boil away and 2 vehicles that need to maintain perfect alignment, never been done by anyone, ever. SpaceX's internal planning timeline targets a first orbital refueling demonstration in June 2026, an uncrewed Starship lunar landing in June 2027, and the earliest crewed moon landing in September 2028. That's aggressive by any standard. On the encouraging side, SpaceX has completed over 30 HLS-specific technical milestones, including full-scale cabin life support testing, elevator demonstrations with the actual AXMU spacesuits, and landing leg drop tests on simulated lunar soil. Now, on the other side of this billion-dollar competition, Blue Origin is building the Blue Moon Mark II lander for Artemis 5, targeting late 2028. And their entire approach looks completely different from SpaceX. Blue Moon stands about 52 feet tall, 1/3 the height of Starship. Instead of an elevator, astronauts walk down a short stairway to reach the surface. It uses 3 BE-7 engines burning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, producing up to 44,000 newtons of thrust each. It can carry up to 4 astronauts for 30 days on the surface with a payload capacity of 20 metric tons in its reusable configuration, or 30 tons expendable. Blue Origin won a $3.4 billion firm fixed price contract from NASA in May 2023, and then invested well over $3.4 billion of its own money on top, putting total development spending somewhere around $7 billion. The company leads a national team that includes Lockheed Martin building a cislunar transporter tug, Boeing on docking systems, Draper handling guidance and navigation, Astrobotic for cargo delivery, and Honeybee Robotics managing cargo operations. The BE-7 engine has already completed a continuous test burn lasting over 17 minutes, and the Blue Moon Mark I cargo Pathfinder lander was fully assembled by October 2025 for a planned robotic landing near Shackleton Crater at the South Pole. And then there's the spacesuit situation, which is honestly one of the coolest sidebars in the entire program. After NASA's in-house spacesuit program fell years behind schedule and way over budget, the agency pivoted to a commercial approach. They awarded Axiom Space a $228 million contract to build the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or AXIMU. And then Axiom did something that made headlines for reasons nobody expected. They brought in Prada. Yes, that Prada. The Italian luxury fashion house designed the suit's outer layer. The result is a white suit with dark gray protective pads on the elbows and knees, light blue boot soles as a callback to the Apollo legacy, an Oakley-designed visor optimized for the extreme low sun angles at the South Pole, built-in 4G LTE communications for talking with mission control, HD cameras mounted in the helmet, biometric sensors monitoring the astronauts' vital signs, and regenerable carbon dioxide scrubbing systems. The suit supports 8-hour moonwalks, including over 2 hours operating in permanently shadowed regions where temperatures plunge to unimaginable cold. And unlike the Apollo-era suits, which only accommodated certain male body types, the AXIMU is designed to fit every body from the 1st to the 99th percentile. The first flight unit is under assembly as of February 2026. Artemis 5 also brings something back to the moon that hasn't been there in over 50 years. A rover. The Apollo 17 crew drove the last lunar roving vehicle across the surface in December 1972, and it's still sitting there covered in dust, exactly where they left it. NASA is investing up to $4.6 billion across 3 competing teams to build a modern successor called the Lunar Terrain Vehicle. And the requirements make the original Apollo buggy look like a golf cart. It has to carry cargo, 800 kilograms of cargo, travel 12 miles per day, operate for 8 continuous hours, survive the brutal 14-day lunar night where temperatures drop far below -200 degrees Celsius, and function both as a crewed vehicle that astronauts can drive and as a fully autonomous robotic platform that conducts science between crewed visits. That last part is key. Between Artemis missions, this rover drives itself around the South Pole collecting data and scouting terrain. So when the next crew arrives, they already know exactly where to go. The 3 teams competing are intuitive machines with their Moon Racer design alongside Boeing and Michelin, Lunar Outpost's Lunar Dawn concept with Lockheed Martin and General Motors and Goodyear, and Venturi Astrolab with their own modular design. The winning rover gets pre-positioned on the surface by a commercial cargo lander before the crew even arrives, so it's waiting for them when they touch down. Now we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that elephant weighs $93 billion. NASA has spent that staggering sum over 13 years on Artemis-era programs. Every single SLS launch costs roughly $4.1 billion. For comparison, each Saturn V launch during the Apollo era cost about $1.4 billion in today's inflation-adjusted money. The Artemis program is running a 140% over its original budget estimates, and a 2025 Government Accountability Office report flagged $6.8 billion in cost over UNRS across just 3 major Artemis projects. The politics around funding are just as chaotic as the engineering challenges. The Trump administration's fiscal year 26 budget proposed a 24% cut to NASA and actually called for canceling SLS and Orion entirely after Artemis 3. Congress pushed back aggressively. The so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed on July 4, 2025, injected nearly $10 billion in supplemental funding into NASA, including $4.1 billion earmarked specifically for SLS rockets for Artemis 4 and 5. The resulting fiscal year 26 budget of approximately $27.5 billion was NASA's largest since 1998 in inflation-adjusted terms. But the fiscal year 27 proposal again sought a 23% cut, and the cycle continues. But here's the factor that makes all the budget squabbling feel almost small. China's national space program is targeting a crewed lunar landing by 2030. They're constructing the International Lunar Research Station with 13 partner nations, including Russia. Their Long March 10 rocket is already in development, and they've successfully landed robotic probes on the far side of the moon, something no other country has accomplished. They returned the first samples from the moon's far side with the Chang'e 6 mission in 2024. This isn't an aspirational timeline from a country playing catch-up. China has met every major space milestone they've set for the past decade, on schedule or ahead of it. And Isaacman has explicitly framed Artemis as an issue of great power competition, publicly saying the clock is running and that success or failure will be measured in months, not years. The stated goal is to land American astronauts on the moon before the end of President Trump's term. Meanwhile, the Artemis Accords, a set of non-binding principles for peaceful space exploration, have now been signed by 61 countries as of January 2026. That's up from just 8 founding nations when the Accords launched in October 2020. The coalition now spans every inhabited continent. But notably absent from the list are China and Russia, who have called the Accords a US-centric attempt to shape international space law. Key international partners are deeply embedded in the program. ESA provides the European service module that powers Orion, built by Airbus with contributions from 10 European nations. JAXA in Japan is building a pressurized lunar rover with Toyota in exchange for surface time for Japanese astronauts, potentially making them the first non-Americans on the moon. Canada flew astronaut Jeremy Hansen on Artemis 2, the first Canadian on a lunar mission. And this is where the vision gets truly enormous. Because Artemis isn't about visiting the moon and coming home. The end game is staying there permanently. NASA's March 2026 plan envisions 76 robotic and crewed landings delivering over 200 metric tons of hardware to the lunar surface, across 3 construction phases spanning roughly $20 billion over 7 years. Phase 1 runs through 2028 and focuses on proving reliability. 21 landings delivering 4 metric tons of hardware, including early rovers, the Viper ice prospecting robot, propulsive drones that can hop up to 50 kilometers for terrain surveys, and 2 communications satellite constellations providing over 500 megabits per second of bandwidth. That's faster internet on the moon than a lot of people have at home. Phase 2 runs through 2031 and builds the actual base. 27 landings, 60 metric tons of infrastructure, semi-habitable modules where astronauts can live and work, solar and nuclear power systems, communication towers, and the pressurized JAXA rover that Toyota is helping design, with 2 crewed missions per year becoming routine. Imagine a world where going to the moon twice a year is just Tuesday at NASA. Phase 3 runs through 2036 and achieves permanent occupation. 28 landings, 150 metric tons of equipment, fission power plants capable of running through the 2-week lunar night, multiple habitats supporting 4 astronauts on monthly rotations, and an industrial zone for extracting oxygen and hydrogen from the lunar soil and converting it into water, rocket fuel, and construction materials. At that point, the moon base starts manufacturing some of its own supplies instead of shipping everything from Earth. That's the fundamental difference between this program and everything that came before. Apollo's 6 successful landings were, as NASA veterans have described them, camping trips, flags, footprints, a few hundred pounds of rocks, and home. Nobody built anything that lasted. Nobody set up infrastructure for the next crew. Every mission started from scratch. Artemis is designed to be cumulative. Each mission builds on the last. The Orion capsule is 50% larger than Apollo's command module. The commercial landers are 2 to 7 times the size of the Apollo lunar module. Where Apollo's guidance computer ran on 4 kilobytes of memory, less than a modern calculator, Artemis systems are millions of times more capable. Where Apollo 17 spent a maximum of 3 days on the surface, Artemis is targeting weeks, then months, then continuous habitation where there's always someone living and working on the moon. So where does that leave us right now? Artemis 2 splashed down successfully in April 2026, sending 4 astronauts around the moon and back, with Victor Glover becoming the first person of color beyond low Earth orbit, and Christina Koch, the first woman. The program sits 3 missions from a landing that would be the first in over half a century. But massive uncertainties remain. Neither SpaceX nor Blue Origin has demonstrated orbital refueling. Neither has landed a crew-rated vehicle on the moon. The 2028 timeline is aggressive, even by optimistic standards. International allies are still scrambling after the Gateway cancellation shook up years of planning, and Congress and the White House keep swinging between lavish funding and proposed cuts every single budget cycle. After $93 billion, 7 delays to Artemis 3 alone, a canceled lunar space station, and a completely rewritten mission sequence, NASA is betting everything on an incremental test before you leap strategy, a competition between 2 private companies, and a moon-based roadmap that sounds like science fiction. Whether they pull it off is the biggest question in space exploration right now, but whatever happens next, it's going to be one hell of a ride. If this breakdown helped you understand where NASA's moon program actually stands, smash that like button and subscribe. We'll be covering every Artemis milestone as it happens. And trust me, there will be plenty to talk about.